Hi, and welcome to a special episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. From the 16th to the 19th of May, our team blanketed the Bitcoin 2013 conference so we could bring you fresh, in-person interviews with the amazing minds driving Bitcoin towards the future of money. As a result, we have a pretty enormous number of these interviews we'll be releasing in our special conference series over the next 2 weeks. I'm very pleased to present this wide-ranging interview with Erik Voorhees, in which we cover Satoshi Dice, business of Panama, autonomous regions, and the lessons of the Honduras Free Zone, becoming the man who gave himself to Bitcoin, the Free State Project, how this time really is different, the nightmare scenarios, the poor timing of Ripple, and much, much more. Join us tomorrow for the next release in the series, Secure Communications, Identity Management, and Bitcoin on your iPhone with Rob Benegali of Glyph. Enjoy the show. So we're here with Erik Voorhees of Coinapult and a whole variety of other projects. Erik, one of the other projects that you're representing right now is Satoshi Dice, which is arguably the largest single transaction generating thing on the Bitcoin network.
That's right.
You know, it's one of those properties that kind of has positive press because it's something that I think a lot of people wind up using. But then it gets negative press because it puts a lot of transactions onto the blockchain, and so you've had some problems with developers in the past. One of the things that happened, I guess yesterday, we're recording this on Friday, was that IP addresses that were from the United States are basically not allowed to participate in the system any longer.
That's right. Yeah.
So we talked about this on the show that released today, because we had talked about this a little bit in advance, and one of the things that Stephanie wanted to know is, why did you take this action preemptively? Because it seems like there aren't really any rules on the books that preclude what it is that you're doing.
Right. So I've spoken with quite a few lawyers over the last several months because Satoshi Dice has gotten to the size where that is a prudent thing to do. They can give different arguments over how or how not a Bitcoin site might be legal or illegal to the U.S. government or to certain states. One could argue that what Satoshi Dice is doing is fully compliant with U.S. law because it's not violating the banking network regulations. Those were the laws that were used to take down the poker sites several years ago. But more than anything, just blocking U.S. players completely is simply the best way to show that you care about the U.S. laws, is to say, sorry, U.S. players, you can't play here because it's a free country.
So that seems a little counterintuitive.
Yeah. I mean, it's absurd. It's just that, when you're around litigious countries that look to crush innovations whenever it doesn't comply with some rules that they've set long ago, or just if they want to make an example out of someone, they'll do it, without a second thought. Because I'm somewhat high profile in the Bitcoin world, and I have a lot of projects that are very important to me, I felt like it was a very prudent move to simply block the U.S. entirely on the advice of the lawyers, and so that's what's been done. So U.S. players, as of yesterday, can no longer play Satoshi Dice.
So do you think that winds up cutting into the profitability of Satoshi Dice? Because, I mean, clearly it's not a charitable organization.
That's true. It's not a
must have come
charitable
at a
organization. I'm sure it will, yeah. But again, Bitcoin is very much a global phenomenon, so it's not really focused on the U.S. And I'm fine with kind of moving outside of the tyrannical borders of the U.S. to go elsewhere in the world where they're still accepting of business.
Now, tyrannical borders of the U.S. Kind of a couple of questions to go off of from that. First off, you are a U.S. citizen, but you no longer live in the United States.
Correct.
And that was a decision you made because?
I've lived abroad a couple times, and mainly I like living abroad because there are cities that have far more favorable tax regimes. So I used to live in Dubai, and now we moved our entire company out of the U.S. to Panama, primarily because we want to be able to serve the rest of the world without the absurd apparatus of U.S. regulations crushing down on us at every opportunity. If we want to help some farmers in Somalia set up mobile banking on their phone, we don't want to have to get their social security number for that. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
So, unfortunately, being a U.S. citizen and being in the U.S. is a liability now, not a benefit. This is quite tragic of a development to happen, but it just makes sense to get away from that whole country.
Again, on the subject of kind of the tyrannical U.S., one of the things that popped up this morning is that there is an attempt at making an autonomous region that is going to be fully accepting and and understanding basically of what Bitcoin is trying to do in this sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Competitive currency thing. Because you have that phenomenon elsewhere in the world, but ultimately, whether you're talking about the Chinese currency or the U.S. currency, ultimately everything is still kind of backed by the U.S. currency, and that's not really true with Bitcoin as it is with everything else. What are your thoughts about projects like these?
Well, first of all, I want to make sure that it's real and that it happens. I know a few details that I can't divulge about that project, and they make me very excited, but at the same time, it hasn't happened yet, so I'm holding my judgment.
Right, I noticed that they said that they were not allowed to say where it was going to be because of something that happened in the Honduras, I believe. Are you familiar with this?
There was a free zone project in Honduras that looked really bright for a while and got like some final approvals, and everyone thought it was good to go, and then I think the Supreme Court of Honduras voted to shut it down for constitutional reasons in the country due to populist outrage because people did not want there to be a free zone. There's lots of propaganda about how it would steal jobs and impoverish everyone and lead to pollution and all these things.
Well, it's interesting that when you talk about a free zone, that implies that other zones are not free, and that in fact other zones have quite a lot. So are we talking about like a regulatory regime for everything, or are we just talking about money? Because I was kind of under the impression it was just about the money.
Well, these types of free zones can sort of be conceived in a number of ways. The one in Honduras was essentially the most free a zone has ever been. It was going to be essentially a free private city with some very loose laws, like you can't murder people, that would still be enforced by the Honduran government. But essentially, the territory would be owned and operated by private companies. Ah,
okay. So you're talking really more about like a corporate free zone where you've got companies that exist in there and they functionally set the rules for their particular areas?
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So is that better?
Than what?
Oh, is that better than the alternative? Is it better to have private companies setting rules for their particular zones? Doesn't that sort of lead to a situation where you can have, tyranny within in addition to without?
Well, the key is that a corporation setting up its own territory and making its own rules allows people to join it voluntarily. So if you agree with the rules, you can go move there.
So it's an opt-in system rather than you can't do anything opt-in or out.
That's right.
Okay.
And so, if that company owns the rights to that land, they should be able to do whatever they want. It's their property. Now, if they are smart and benevolent and they choose to make it very free and open, then great. But the fundamental point is that joining it is voluntarily in the first place.
Right.
And I trust profit seekers more than I do those who are seeking political favors.
Right.
I trust a greedy corporate CEO more than I trust a politician. I think the incentives are better. So I think it would be a great experiment to see some of those little cities actually get up and running, but unfortunately the one in Honduras got shut down.
Yeah, but you have hopes for this next one. You said you want to make sure it's real, but
I want to make sure it's real. If it is real, then it could be extremely exciting. But it's a very long-term project. It's similar to the Free State in that it's something that will happen over 5, 10, 20 years.
Right.
Whereas Bitcoin's a little more exciting because it's happening every single day and extremely quickly.
So you've been described as the man who gave himself to Bitcoin, or gave his life to Bitcoin.
Yeah,
I think that was
that article was somewhat flattering and it was nice to read, but there are a lot of people involved with Bitcoin. There are thousands of entrepreneurs who have basically quit everything that they were doing and are just poured themselves into Bitcoin. So, I don't
think you're the only man who gave his life to Bitcoin. Certainly, it's something that I've stopped all of my other projects to focus on kind of covering this stuff because, again, it seems like the most exciting opportunity out there and certainly has the most potential behind it.
Yeah.
I guess the question I was getting at is, what's your background? What led you to the point? What were you doing before you were the man who gave himself to Bitcoin?
After Dubai, we moved back to the U.S. and we were living in New Hampshire as part of the Free State Project.
Well, what were you doing in Dubai? What was your profession before you got into this?
I was doing marketing for a real estate company over there, and that was just something I wanted to do after college, so I moved out there. And then when I got back, I wasn't sure kind of what career path I wanted to take and where I would be living. And so I was doing freelance work, and then I saw a Facebook post about Bitcoin, and within a few hours, I was utterly hooked and stopped doing absolutely everything else.
And when was this?
That was early May of 2011.
2011.
So just before the first price bubble.
Huh.
So that was a very exciting time in that summer. And then we had the dark days where it just fell back down slowly to $2 by that November. And during that time, I think most of the true Bitcoin believers were hard at work building a lot of interesting systems that then led to the price being able to recover. And
it seems like that's a trend. Is that these price spikes come along and they say to everybody, "Oh my God, look at this opportunity here! Look at what's happening here!" And then the price crashes back down, and those people are still all working on the projects that were initiated during the spike. And so you get this period, this lull period where everybody's developing, but then at the end of it you come out and suddenly there's all these services that are coming out when the currency is much lower than it was at the time when it became interesting.
Exactly, and everyone should expect there to be lots of these bubbles.
Right.
I mean, this is an asset that's going to be worth either zero or thousands and thousands of dollars in 10 years. And so the market is going to have a very hard time figuring out what it should be between now and then. Every time there's good news, the price is going to go up. Bad news is going to go down, and people should be ready for kind of a wild ride.
Right.
But every time the spikes happen, it gets all sorts of new people interested, and some of those people only get interested for quick riches, and they leave when the price is going back down again. But some portion of the new interested people stick around and get completely excited by it and start meeting all the other people and start building up the companies and projects that make the whole thing actually work.
So your background is marketing,
Right.
Yes?
Yeah.
What did you go to college for?
Political economics.
Political economics,
Yeah.
and then got into marketing from there.
Yes, and I learned absolutely nothing about economics in college. So I would say college was more just 4 years spent waiting to get out until I could actually start learning real things in the real world, in business, in economics, and politics. So my background is not something that led me to Bitcoin, but my natural propensity toward free markets is something that, as soon as I saw Bitcoin, it immediately intrigued me because finally it allowed a free market to actually occur.
Right. So you commented that you were involved with the Free State Project briefly. Yeah. So how did that go? How was that? I mean, it seems like it's a choice not just to move there, but it's also a real meaningful choice to move away from there once you're already, once you've already made the change and you're in it. So is the situation you're in now, is it equivalent? Is it better than it was at the Free State? As far as your feeling of personal liberty is concerned, because you're outside the U.S. borders now. So, I mean, is it just if you're inside the U.S. borders, then you still have that hanging over you and being outside is safer, or?
Well, when I found out about the Free State Project, it was very exciting because it seemed like a reasonable way to actually achieve some meaningful progress with freedom by getting lots of libertarians into one concentrated area. But the idea was always that it would be sort of a long-term thing, 10 years or whatever, 20 years. And then when I found Bitcoin, it not only had far bigger ramifications because it's not just one little geographic area, but it's the entire world, and it also moves much, much faster. I had to go for that, and so I left New Hampshire to join BitInstant in New York and start building these Bitcoin companies.
So you're involved with a lot of companies, some of them public, some of them not. What's the most exciting one to you personally that you can talk about? Because, I mean, I think that there are a lot of infrastructure projects, but those are kind of early ones. You talk about BitInstant, and that's really all about getting around the existing banking system so that you can, effectively fund without having to jump through 2 weeks' worth of hoops.
Right.
So, getting beyond that type of project, what is the most interesting thing to you on the horizon, whether you're involved in it or not, really?
On the near-term horizon, I think that Bitcoin is going to save the people of Argentina. I think that Argentina is primed for Bitcoin right now. They're going through 50% per year inflation right now. Their currency is falling apart. And they've done this many times in the past, and their people know all about currency debasement. Finally, there is something that they can use to get out of that situation.
This time is different.
This time is different because now they have something that they can turn to. So our company is going to be focusing a lot on working down there, in the later half of this year. I've met a bunch of really wonderful people who are from Argentina, and they already have these networks of people who are starting to teach people about Bitcoin down there. And as that country experiences hyperinflation, I'm just really hopeful that it'll be a test case and a proof of concept for why Bitcoin is so important. Cyprus did that a little bit, a little tiny event there, but Argentina is like, a much bigger fish.
My feeling about the Cyprus thing, is that because we've talked with some people from Cyprus, and it sounds like it has made Bitcoin is not known there at all, and
No.
there are some attempts to get it integrated in a little bit more now that they kind of have this on the table, but. I've been calling Cyprus the bailout that broke the world, not because of the severity of it, but because it revealed that any rule or rules or whatever can be changed pretty much at will by a couple of people. When the situation is serious enough. Jean-Claude Trichet has a quote. When the situation is serious, you must lie. So
right.
So is that what we have to see over and over and over again before? People of the world kind of start waking up to this? Or do you think that it's going to be a more natural progression as we go through this valuation climb?
Well, when the Cyprus thing happened and the Bitcoin price started going crazy, a lot of people made the assumption that people in Cyprus were buying Bitcoin. That wasn't happening at all. What was happening was that people around the world saw the need for something like Bitcoin, the need for an asset to be unseizable, for there to be something that you can actually trust because you're not trusting another party, you're not trusting a bank or a government, but you're actually just trusting mathematics. And people saw that and they realized that, wow, there is value here, so maybe we should take this thing a little more seriously. And I don't expect the situation in Europe to get better. It's certainly not going to get better elsewhere in the world either. And so as people realize that these fiat systems are just absolutely terrible, more and more they will start to look for alternatives, and thank goodness there's one that's actually legitimate.
The competition aspect is certainly an interesting one, where it introduces the ability to have an alternative. I think that's like, Bitcoin itself is an interesting concept, but I've been talking to people about it now for over a year, and it was only really in the last 6 months, I'd say, that kind of the appreciation for the severity of the problems that are facing the world has, and more than that there's no plan. That the plan that we have right now, where we just kind of go from crisis to crisis, and it's everybody's having fun except nobody's actually having any fun at all, So my theory is that the greatest threat that is in front of Bitcoin, because let's talk about altcoins for a second. The altcoins are kind of an interesting subset, but the way that I reason it, they're like a life raft when you live in a tornado zone. The thing that I think that has the potential to be really detrimental to Bitcoin is some type of really draconian regulatory action by either the U.S. government or somebody else either. I think that if you saw that start in the next, say, 6 months, then it wouldn't kill Bitcoin certainly, but it would be very damaging to it, and it would make people reticent to adopt it because they feel like, this is something that can happen where I live too. So that's my kind of worst case scenario at this point. I'm not really concerned about RSA encryption being broken or anything like that.
Right.
What do you think? What is the scenario, if any, that keeps you up at night thinking, what if that happens? All of my plans are screwed.
I suppose that, one has to always understand that there could still be some terrible bug in Bitcoin that just brings the entire system down. It's still in beta. It's still new. It's still relatively untested as far as money goes. It's only 4 years old. So the whole thing could fall apart. And actually, even if that happens, people just fix the problem and make another currency, another cryptocurrency. And so even that would be a temporary problem. It would only harm the people holding Bitcoins temporarily, and then the new system would get going. So more and more I've started to understand that this idea of a distributed currency is really kind of inevitable. There's no way to stop it. The regulation can certainly slow it down. It can scare some people in some places for some amount of time. But it's not like all regulation around the world works in unison. If the U.S. outlaws something, it's not going to be outlawed in other countries necessarily. And every time a country acts against Bitcoin, it gets press everywhere else in the world. And at some point, people are just going to start losing faith in these governments. If the U.S. is commenting on Bitcoin as it is a bad currency, well, from what position are they saying that? Their currency is terrible. It's lost 98% of its value since it was created in 1913. And people at some point are going to realize that their money is losing value every year. Bitcoin is gaining value every year. So maybe someone at the government is lying. And hopefully with the internet, they can go and learn about why these phenomenons are happening. And hopefully with education and time, the truth will come out.
So barring one of these, giant bugs in the code, do you think that we're already past the tipping point? I mean, I don't. We talked about Argentina a little bit, and at the Bitcoin meetup that we went to last night, there were most of the VC speakers there were from South America. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really interesting. I wasn't aware that there was kind of that connection, or at least to the exclusion of U.S. So, I mean, do you think that that's just because they have such a greater awareness of that this is something that really can happen, or do you think that it's just the multicultural nature of Bitcoin?
People in the U.S. are often, fat and comfortable. They have their bread and their circuses, and in general, life is relatively good for most people. In other countries, they see the problems of government control of currency much more real. They've lived through it several times in their lifetime, the whole complete collapse of a currency. So they understand money much more than your average person in America. And so I think, these Argentinians who you were speaking about last night, this is easy for them. Like, they see something like Bitcoin and immediately it's apparent why it's so important. Whereas an American's like, well, I already have PayPal and I already have my bank. What's the problem?
All right. So one of the other systems that's come out that has been getting some attention is Ripple from OpenCoin. And it's not the original Ripple, because I looked at the concept about 2 years ago when they were first talking about it, and it was sort of different than it is now. And I talked with the lead cryptographer last week, and I think I kind of understand it now, but it's like making a jump from using dollars to using Bitcoin. It's like the same jump from using Bitcoin to using OpenCoin, because it has so many things about it that are like antithetical to how Bitcoin works. In terms of it's basically a system built on debt, and it allows you to transact value in U.S. dollars. In a way that you really can't with Bitcoin, and in a way that it's like a combination of Bitcoin and Hawala and open transactions and a couple of other things.
Right.
Do you have any experience with Ripple? Have you tried it? Do you think it's a good idea?
I've tried it quite extensively. I know a lot of the developers who are building it, and I've been following it with interest, obviously. I have a number of concerns about it. Primarily, I think it is inferior to Bitcoin, and it would have been super cool had it come before Bitcoin. It would have been a great alternative to the dollar system that we have. Having seen Bitcoin and how it works and how elegant it is, and how simple it is if you actually get down to it, Ripple almost seems like a solution in search of a problem that has been already solved by Bitcoin. And my main problem with it is that it is typically marketed as a way to send money of any kind, whether it's a cryptocurrency or dollars or shares of gold or any asset. You're supposed to be able to send through Ripple. But actually you can't send assets whatsoever through Ripple. All you can send are IOUs for assets. And people do not understand that an IOU for $1 is not $1. And there are a lot of reasons why it's very good to be able to send an asset and not so useful to send an IOU, or at least it's far inferior. So now that I live in this world of Bitcoin, where if I need to pay someone, I send them the asset instantly, and they have it immediately, no matter where they are. And when I want to get paid, I want that asset. I want the Bitcoins to come to me, and then I have them. Deal over. It's going to Ripple feels like taking a step back, because then once I get an IOU for someone, then I still have to get it cleared and processed through the normal banking system and the normal transactions that we're all trying to get away from anyway.
Now, compared to Bitcoin, it's inferior. What about compared to Mt. Gox? Because that's the other application, that's the other use scenario that's being tossed around a lot, is that Ripple could functionally serve as the way to have a quasi-decentralized exchange. And I know that right now they're on a couple of servers, but talking to David Schwartz, he was saying that the plan is for there to be, hundreds, thousands of federated servers functionally that don't really talk to each other. So
here's the key. They can have as many servers as they want that hold data and cryptocurrencies. But their whole point is that you can send normal fiat monies and other types of assets. Those things can't be held on servers. They have to be held in banks by a trusted party. So they don't improve in any way over a system like GOX. If you want your dollars through Ripple, it still is going to have to come from what are called hubs. And they still have to have bank accounts and get that money to you, and they're still going to have to follow all the regulatory compliance of their country. So it doesn't. All it does is allow you to send cryptocurrencies around in a little bit different of a way, but nothing that's improved over Bitcoin.
Hubs are what I called them too. He called them gateways.
Gateways.
Yeah, I know, right? But it feels like hubs because, you've got the... Anyways, we can continue on.
Yeah, the gateways, though, have to be the same as exchanges because they have to have bank accounts.
Right.
If they're going to actually hold people's fiat money, they have to have bank accounts.
Yeah.
And Ripple cannot elevate a hub like that above all the problems that we see with Mt. Gox.
Right. So now, Mt. Gox has been having problems recently.
Yeah.
And by all accounts, obviously we're still waiting to kind of see what's happened, but it looks like these are sort of self-induced wounds to a certain extent by not following the rules in the way that, I talked with Jared Kenna from Trade Hill, and he was all about compliance. That was the only thing that he viewed as his job, was to make sure that not only were they in compliance with the letter of the law, but they were in compliance with the spirit of the law, and after that they were like 20% over-complied anyways there. So, do you think that that's the future for exchanges in the U.S., or do you even think that U.S. exchanges are tenable? Because there are a lot starting up.
First of all, I don't think any Bitcoin business should base itself in the United States whatsoever. Just flat out. But Mt. Gox has done a lot to try to comply. It's not like they've been some rogue exchange that has been living off in Antarctica so that no governments can touch them. They've probably spent more than anyone else in the entire ecosystem on compliance, on lawyers, on trying to figure out how to maintain themselves as legal. This issue that happened recently where they got served by the Department of Homeland Security, in the warrant something was cited about Mark from Mt. Gox writing that he was not a money transmitter on some bank application in May of 2011. Well, back in May of 2011, things were very different. He may have back then totally thought that Mt. Gox was not a money transmitter. This was all just made up magic internet
So the
money.
compliance is a moving target then? That's the issue.
Well, yeah, and so now there's been guidance in the last few months from FinCEN, which makes it look like, actually, Mt. Gox might need to consider itself a money transmitter. But that was not true back in 2011. And I'm sure that Mark simply forgot that he wrote that on a bank statement, 2 years ago.
Right.
It's not like Mark was trying to deceive anyone. He probably wrote that down honestly, didn't remember that was there, and now the government's found that little piece of damning evidence, and they're going to use that to launch a whole case against the guy.
So you think that that's what this is then? It's more, it's not about necessarily non-compliance, it's more about, they're looking for reasons. They're,
Absolutely. If the government wants to go after someone, they will find any reason they can, or they will make up a reason to go after them. It doesn't matter how compliant you are, it's just how long it takes for the government to figure out a good excuse to go after you.
So do you think that this is the future for Bitcoin businesses in general? Clearly you're involved in a number of them, and you don't live in the United States anymore, but
no, look, I think a company that tries to get full-on money transmitter licensing in the U.S., as any bank would, actually banks don't need to, but as any large payment company would, can probably stay away from the problems that the government would bring down on them. But the government isn't going to like that. They don't want people compliant. As they become aware of what Bitcoin's actually doing, they're going to get very fussy because Bitcoin actually competes with their own money, and that's what they haven't quite realized yet.
Do you think they haven't realized it?
I think.
You think they haven't realized it or don't appreciate it?
I think that the government's big, right? So I don't want to generalize and say all of them think the same. But I would guess, in general, those in the government who have thought about this see Bitcoin as a problem for things like tax evasion, for money laundering, for criminal funding. And they want to deal with it from that angle. They do not yet understand that it is actually an existential threat to their own currency. And I think that they don't think that because of hubris, because they could never imagine that some random free market magic internet money could displace the mighty dollar. And I think once they make that realization that their currency is actually the artificial virtual currency that can be created out of thin air, and Bitcoin's actually something far more real, and people are going to start clinging to that, then their tone is going to change drastically, and they're going to get far more angry, and we'll see how they treat things, and this whole experiment is to see how far Bitcoin can get before they realize that.
So now, when we're talking about how far Bitcoin can get, are we talking about cryptocurrencies in general, or are we just talking about Bitcoin?
Yeah, cryptocurrencies in general.
Okay, so then coming back to the altcoin thing, how do you view the altcoins? Because I'm very skeptical of them. I look at them and I say, these are speculative instruments based on, this very, very slim chance of, potentially Bitcoin could fail for one of the technical reasons, and then an altcoin chain comes in and fixes that. Mm-hmm. But like Litecoin, for example, seems to offer very little relative to the value it gives, and it doesn't have the network effect.
For an alt chain to displace Bitcoin, it's going to need to offer huge advantages over Bitcoin. Not just small advantages. And I don't even think any of the altcoins have any advantages over Bitcoin. But even if they had a few small ones, even if they were slightly more efficient in one way or another, there's no way that they're going to displace Bitcoin. So in general, I think they're pretty worthless. I don't own them. I don't care about them. I'm glad that they exist, and I'm glad that people work on them. And perhaps someone will make one that is actually solves some huge problem of Bitcoin. But I really don't see that many problems with Bitcoin at all. I'm not sure what there is to solve. It seems to be working beautifully for all the purposes that people are using it for. So, I'm not an altcoin enthusiast. We'll just put it that way.
Erik Voorhees, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this special episode of Let's Talk Bitcoin. Please send all questions, comments, sponsorship inquiries, or critique to adam@letstalkbitcoin.com. If you'd like to learn more about our show, listen to our back catalog of episodes, meet the team, or support the show through Bitcoin donations, please visit us at letstalkbitcoin.com. Thanks to Erik Voorhees for agreeing to such a broad interview. I know I learned quite a bit and hope you did too. Stay tuned for tomorrow's release of our Bitcoin 2013 conference coverage, featuring an interview with Rob Benegali of Glyph, where we discuss secure communications, identity management, playing the venture capital game, and Bitcoin on your iPhone with the Glyph communications platform.